Welcome to another CHRO Conversation, hosted by the Center for Executive Succession at the Darla Moore School of Business. I'm your host, Anthony Nyberg, and today we are speaking with Tim Richmond. Tim is the Executive Vice President and CHRO of AbbVie, a research-driven Fortune 100 biopharmaceutical company with about 50,000 employees serving more than 30 million patients in over 175 countries. In addition to being a firm with more than $56 billion in annual revenue, AbbVie is now consistently recognized as one of the great places to work. Tim is also a fellow of the National Academy of Human Resources, serves on a number of nonprofit boards, and is currently the chairman of the advisory board of the Center for Executive Succession. Tim, as always, thank you for coming down and joining us. We sincerely appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Great to be here.
So one of the things I've heard you and AbbVie talk about a lot is really developing diverse talent. Can you share a little bit about why that's an important issue for your company and for you?
Well, it always kind of at some simple level is, you need the diversity in your workforce to reflect the diversity of the patients that you serve in our case, or whoever your consumers might be. And so I think diversity makes you better. I think it makes you more capable. I think it provides different perspectives. I think there's so many positive business imperatives. To me, it's just the right thing to do and also the smart thing to do.
And can you share a little bit about any specifics that you're doing to really make that happen?
Yeah, really trying to elevate what we're doing in the sense of a sense of belonging. I think that's a broader concept for some, but certainly belonging is important to the sense of diversity that you have. If people don't feel like I can belong here or I feel connected here, that's something that's going to be a disconnect for a workforce. I think the idea also that I'm inspired. So I belong, I'm inspired, are really critical feelings of importance for diversity. And I think also the reality is we're trying to grow the representation of our workforce in certain areas. It's an important part of what an HR professional does. It's also just a good business practice.
And I've heard you talk a lot about your talent philosophy. Can you share a little bit about both why it's important to even have a talent philosophy and then a little bit about what yours is?
Yeah, you go back to the more misaligned we are, I think we should do this or you think you should do that, and whether that's in the human resources function or just in your business, I think you create different standards, which are problematic. I think you reinforce different behaviors, which are problematic. So I like clarity. And so our talent philosophy for our company talks about the importance of behaviors, performance, development, differentiation, accountability, and transparency. And those things are reasons why, when we're clear about what that is, people know what's expected of me. I just think as an employee, it's kind of nice, like what's expected of me, but also for people leaders. Like what matters here, and then how are we going to reinforce it? So things like differentiation for us, we differently develop people based on their potential. We also differently reward people based on their performance and their demonstration of our behaviors.
And you've already spoken about alignment a couple of times. So what does that mean? How do you get that alignment through this talent philosophy from the senior leadership all the way throughout the entire organization?
It clearly has to start at the top. I think it's really important to, yes, be vertically integrated on all these things, but it by practice has to start at the top. If the senior team thinks that's for someone else, that's a problem. So it has to be owned by that senior team and then lived and demonstrated by that senior team such that they can reinforce, this is how we do things in this company. And whether it's how you do performance management, how you do financial planning, whatever it might be, these things that are really critical for us have to be reinforced at all levels, but also it starts with being really clear. This is what we care about. This is what we stand for. This is how the process works, and here's why. So people know, what's the standard? What am I being held to? This is what good looks like in this company.
And when you can do that at the top level and then really get it down, do you think that benefits leaders and managers throughout the organization? Does that give them a better tool?
I do. My experience has been, this is how we do it in this company. I know my boss does it, and I know the people that work for me do the same. And there's some element of fairness that actually comes from that. But I also think there's a lot of energy around, I know what we want, I execute it. I also know it comes from it. And maybe that's the missing link for some. This is how we do things in this company. I have clarity. I'm not sure why. And so maybe helping people understand this is why we do it. For me, it's always in the service of performance, or in service of creating that culture, or in the service of creating greater capabilities. So I always want to be really clear on the what and the why. And maybe that's the missing ingredient for some.
And ESG has become a really popular topic for people to talk about. Is this something that your board is paying a lot of attention to?
Yes, and so I think in particular it depends a little bit by industry. We all have when you think of the environmental or the governance piece in particular, there's some elements around what industry are you in, what literally is your footprint on the broader communities where you live and work or around the world. For us, probably the bigger word is around sustainability and the social element. And so we definitely spend more time on it. We've got certain pieces built into our incentive plans to reinforce it for our leaders. But we put out a sustainability report. It describes our ESG strategy and our approaches. It describes what we're committed to in terms of, again, being good stewards of our environment, being good stewards of our communities where we live and work. So ESG is going to be an area that if you're an HR professional today, whether you're just joining, or you will have this in your remit. This is an important area. It's not just enough to manage your workforce and your company's performance. You've got to be in tune with the external, and you have to have capability in that space.
And there's so many issues that come up that different stakeholders are going to want you to be part of all the time. How do you decide which things to really engage in fully and which things to maybe not go so deeply into?
That's a great question in the context of trying to decide just that. I can't do everything. So what are my priorities? So again, I would say probably some of what could be industry specific, some could be company specific. Some of it goes back to what's your strategy, right? So I think there's a lot of life cycle elements. I also think kind of what does your company stand for and believe in? So we've talked about our principles before as an anchoring element in our company. If things are aligned to our principles, we're going to care more about doing them. When we think about our philanthropy, we're going to think about how that giving is aligned to one of our principles, or that's aligned to one of our therapeutic areas from a patient perspective for patients that we support around the world with our medicine. So a lot of that has to go through a filter of business, philosophy, your kind of your areas of interest and focus, and then otherwise you'll just exhaust yourself if you're not clear, because what you'll find is that I want to focus on my business and be a good steward around ESG. But if I'm solely focused on all the external, I'm not spending enough time on what we're trying to do from a business perspective.
So it sounds great. It sounds like companies caring about more than just their own bottom line, and everybody would like to believe that. Do you see that happening and being sustainable when the economy is not as strong as it's been over recent years?
Well, there's a little bit of friction in the news, if you will, right? From some investors saying, well, we don't want you to go too far, or I want you to care about it, but not so much, because I'm an investor, I want a return on my investment. So there are some pushing and pulling forces around this issue. And I think, again, you want to be clear, what's our strategy, what's our approach, what do our investors care about, what do our communities care about, and trying to find this balance. I always think like that's a word we don't often think of enough, right, in HR. Like, what's the balance we're trying to find around all these issues? And I think when we struggle sometimes, we haven't worked hard enough to figure out where that is. The problem I see sometimes is the pendulum swings too hard. And sometimes when companies struggle is they're swinging hard to an investor issue, swinging too hard to an external issue, and you'd say, wait a minute, somewhere in here is this balance I'm looking for.
Remote work has become one of the real topics of the day, I would say. As a way of thinking about this topic broadly, can you describe a little bit about what was remote work like in the AbbVie culture pre-COVID times?
It's always an important reminder to say we had people that worked remote in that pre-pandemic period. There was reasons why we supported them doing that. There was a good talent philosophy underpinning it, and we could drive performance with those individuals doing their role remotely. What's happened since then, and we've all experienced the pandemic, and for most of us, we had to work at least part of the time remotely. Now, the expectation is that companies are going to be much more clear about how everybody has either a remote work arrangement or a somewhat flexible arrangement around work. So we've gone to a hybrid work model. We call it where we work. It's a little bit of our philosophy, again, about where we work and how we produce our work. The question for me is ultimately going to be how much remote work exists that allows people to have that predictable flexibility, which is what we talk about. We're going to give you predictable flexibility for your work. And at the same time, we still expect high levels of performance. We still expect high levels of collaboration as teams. We think our work is best done in teams, cross-functionally. Remote work challenges that. So the idea as people leaders, you need to find a way to support this idea of more predictable flexibility for some days working not in the office and still drive performance. That's where, when we're doing well, it all works great. My worry for the longer term is for this current environment, how long will companies continue to operate in these work environments if their businesses are challenging, or if they're worried about productivity, or worried about engagement? I think there's really legitimate issues around development of our workforce. New college graduates coming to the workforce today, how do they learn what we might have learned early in our careers, where you go to work and you're around people and you learn from them, you develop because of it, not because there's a direct engagement, because there's a hallway engagement, or there's a follow-on activity, or I just think you're missing something potentially. I think there's some risk to this model in the future.
So there's a lot of issues to unpack in that one. So let's just start with that last part. Where does the resistance come from allowing people to be working remotely more often than not? So I agree with everything you said, but I wonder sometimes if this isn't an age issue about we need to be working in person together to do stuff. So really back to where does the resistance come from, if there is any, from some of the more senior leaders in the company? What are they concerned about?
I think you're right. The resistance starts from how you grew up yourself. I grew up going to work every day, and I'd get up, get dressed, and go to work. And I just assumed that's what everyone else would do as well. And there was always those people, right, that were working remotely, and that was some unique kind of thing. But now that we've all experienced it, one of the benefits to this will be that all of us have had to work somewhat remotely. So that's a good thing. But the resistance will come, I think, now around people's concern around performance or culture. And at some point in time, I think it'll come such from the top. From the bottom, if you will, I think it'll come from employees feeling disengaged, I think worried about their career. How do I grow in this company? What if they don't know you? What if you've been working there for 3 or 4 years and no one actually knows who you are? That's the risk. So I think there's a little bit of top down, a little bit of bottom up. I think the best companies will steer their way through it, but I think there's some challenges to what this will be. And so I always try and think about what comes next. And I'm thinking about that all the time. How do I make sure that we steer through this to the other side in ways that gives us a chance to perform, give us a chance to be a great place to work, have the right culture, engagement, development, that we have sustainability through this process. That's the goal.
So a couple of the challenges that you just highlighted. So one of them is onboarding of new people. And we know that particularly during the pandemic, that was even harder for underrepresented groups. So what are some ideas for things that companies can do better in terms of onboarding in this environment, particularly when many people are remote?
Yeah, I think the naive will think, well, we've just switched everything from an onboarding standpoint to online, there you go. And think, okay, I've done that. And I think that's not the answer. I think there has to be a level of intentionality behind almost everything that you're doing if part of your workforce is remote or fully remote. Because I think this idea of how do you get to know your talent? How do you develop your talent? How do you reinforce cultural pieces? How do you quite simply make teams work effectively? More time, more energy for HR people to show that understand the role that we have. And I'm really watching our workforce. I'm really watching our people leaders. I'm really watching our performance. And I'm trying to stay out in front of all of this to make it all work. But I think what we proved during the pandemic is we can do remote. What we have to prove now is we can perform long term in this environment where maybe we're hybrid, maybe we're some in, some out, but we're going to have to make this really sustainable. And so we have to challenge process, we have to challenge our own capabilities, and we have to also be really in tune. Because I think some companies are still missing it probably. They're not engaging people, they're not finding ways to make people feel more included. That sense of belonging again we talked about earlier, that's critical. So we're spending lots of time on that topic.
So what are some specific things we can do in this more remote environment, particularly around creating that belonging or the culture overall when we're not all together?
I go back to a strategy. You have to have a good strategy. You can't just, hope, I always say, hope is not a good strategy. And so we need to have strategies around that. I'll just think of a couple of examples. I did a broadcast yesterday for Hispanic Heritage Month, and it was a great way to engage people. It was allowed to be virtual. It was virtual. But we had an external speaker. This is one of the pluses. And you can bring the external speaker in. I was on it. We had good dialogue, lots of good Q&A. It was fantastic. And you think of what else? We have, even in the human resources function, we have what we call culture circles. And these circles are really meant to be communities. We'll take our African American or Black colleagues. They have their own culture circle. and it's really for them. And in some cases you'd say, well, we do this and we bring everyone together. No, this is their community, and they focus on their development. They do a lot on onboarding. They do a lot on mentoring. They do a lot on what are issues that are important to them. And it's been really powerful because what it showcases is the strength of them together. It also helps them feel a stronger sense of connection. And some are remote and some are in person. And I just think this idea of intentionality is going to be critical.
At Center for Executive Succession, we spend a lot of time talking about the CHRO's role in CEO succession. Can you share a little bit about what the role is for that CHRO in other aspects of senior leadership? So say CFO succession.
Well, there's 100% truth to the most important role we plan for on the succession side is the CEO. But there are other critical roles, and you mentioned one. The CFO is especially in today's day and age, that's a significant role, arguably in most companies, the second most important role. We've got to be really good in this space. I mean, HR should be really closely aligned with the board and with the CEO on that CEO succession. And that's where I think you differentiate, again, how HR is positioned in your company. You're playing a role or you're not. And we definitely play a role, and I'm happy to do that for my company. But the CFO is another high-risk role for getting it wrong, and also high-value role if you get it right. And there's a few others, and it might be specific to each company and each industry, but I think you're right. CEO, CFO, those are the two most important pieces that I deal with on a succession standpoint.
And is your role as CHRO, are you treating it similarly to like a CEO succession, and really in terms of how well it's planned and how deep you're going into the organization?
We are, and the board has high expectations for me in that regard, and that's a good thing. I welcome that because the idea of CEO succession, then everybody else, and again, what I hear from people who have the same role that I do at other companies is they're being asked the same thing, which is it's not just the CEO. Probably it's a pick of 3 or 4 positions that the board cares about the most. In our case, head of R&D is a really important role, and that's our lifeblood and our future. So we have a very detailed plan around certain roles in our company, and you would not be surprised to learn that's one of them. So I think, again, you've got to be good, not just in terms of being able to help a board select the CEO, probably one of their most important jobs, if not their most important job, and to play that role with them, but also then this capability that you have for other roles. CFO, R&D in my case, our case, and then and whatever else is important to the board. So it's not good enough to be good enough in this space.
And I've also heard you speak a lot about having a purpose-driven company and then also purpose-driven leadership.
Yes.
Can you say a little bit about what you mean by both of those and why they're important?
Well, first of all, I always think personally they're important. Like I get motivation from having clarity of purpose, right? And I think when we have clarity of purpose, and for some companies it could be a mission statement, for others it could be my own sense of purpose for what I'm trying to accomplish or what my goals are. But that to me is really important. So I think clarity of purpose is important individually, but it's also really important organizationally. And so when we have clarity of purpose, I don't have to be everywhere if people know it. And so the more it's known at different layers in your organization, the more we're aligned to that shared sense of purpose. I don't have to wonder if you're centric to, or if you center yourself around our patients. I don't have to wonder if you center yourself around our expectations around culture. I've given you clarity, I've reinforced it, and the benefit you get is people are activating it without you being there. And that's the beauty of it. Otherwise, it's a random exercise, right? And I think people find themselves having a hard time corralling noise or process or outcome or whatever might be going on. So I'm a huge believer in the importance of clarity of purpose.
Tim, as always, it is a tremendous honor and pleasure for us to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
You just listened to another CHRO conversation. Today, Tim Richmond of AbbVie shared his views regarding the role of HR in driving business success. He also shared ideas for how HR can help create a balance in the future workplace between maximal employee flexibility and maximal operational excellence. On behalf of all of us who are associated with the Master of Human Resources program and the Center for Executive Succession here at the University of South Carolina, thank you for joining us.